Item 10, conduct of business. A, receive report and approve response to the grand jury report entitled Reversing the Upward Trajectory of Employee Costs in the Cities of San Mateo County. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item before you tonight is a draft response to a grand jury report that was prepared and circulated to all of the cities in San Mateo County at the beginning of June of this year. As the council knows, the grand jury, each county is required to impanel a grand jury every year, and that grand jury is tasked with the responsibility of evaluating at its choice certain public agency issues as it deems appropriate. When the grand jury prepares and releases a report, that report is distributed to the agencies to which it is relevant. And typically those agencies are required to provide a response to the grand jury's findings and their recommendations. As I indicated, this particular report was distributed and has as its subject each and every of the 20 cities in San Mateo County, and in particular what the grand jury calls the upward trajectory of employee costs in each of these cities. The grand jury has conducted an evaluation and has researched and reported on certain aspects and certain facts related to the cost of employees, numbers of employees, and related items in each of our cities. And that information, as it has been assembled by the grand jury, is included in the grand jury's report. As the title of the report indicates, the grand jury has concluded that there is a significant problem and a significant need to address employee costs in each of our cities. The grand jury's conclusion is based on the fact, or among the facts, among the issues that the grand jury analyzed and reported on and uses as the basis of its conclusion, is the fact that our cities and indeed our state and our nation are experiencing a significant recessionary economy that has reduced significantly, in many cases, resources within each of our agencies that can be devoted to critical and necessary public services. As the grand jury's report also indicates, it's not uncommon and in fact is typical that employee costs are the single most significant cost factor or expenditure item within each of our cities, because we are in fact public service agencies, and so it's to be expected that a very significant percentage, and that as reported in the grand jury's findings, is roughly 70% of costs in each of our agencies is devoted to employee compensation, or the total of employee compensation. Given that resources have been reduced and costs for employee compensation is a significant cost factor in delivering public services, the grand jury concludes that it is the employee costs which is the problem. And while, as our draft response demonstrates, there are many areas of the grand jury's findings and conclusions with which the draft response and your staff actually agrees enthusiastically with. There are numbers of the conclusions or the recommendations that we believe and are recommending to you may be a little bit off the mark in terms of both the analysis as well as the conclusion and the recommendation. And we wanted to go through those with you tonight. The material is actually fairly lengthy and fairly complex. And what I wanted to do first, and then I'm going to ask our Administrative Services Director, Jim O'Leary, to make some additional comments. I wanted to cover some of those topic areas that the grand jury has addressed that are sort of the most significant or most overarching conclusions that the grand jury has reached. and to give you a brief comment on what the draft response says about that. The those three areas are employee retirement costs, the costs for retiree medical benefits or premiums, and thirdly, the area, the general area of the appropriate manner in which a community or city ought to be establishing its compensation philosophy and policy. Those are the areas that I'll comment on, and then Jim will comment on several of the other more detailed areas of the grand jury's findings. First, as it relates to retirement costs, this is an area that has been the subject of a great deal of discussion in our state for a long time, for many years now. And it is the subject of some previous activity and what I expect will be a renewed interest in legislative reform. As you know, this city and the other cities in our county participate in the CalPERS, or California Public Employee Retirement System program for retirement benefits. That system provides a defined benefit program that is based on numbers of years of service and compensation at the conclusion of a public employee's career, and a formula that essentially provides a certain level of benefit based on numbers of years and compensation at the end of the career, just prior to retirement. As the council is aware, costs for the PERS program are borne jointly by employees and by the city or the public agency member of PERS. And recently, and this is the subject of the grand jury's concern, recently, and particularly in the last 12 months or so, PERS costs have been seriously, or rather PERS resources have been seriously impacted by the recessionary economy, and in particular the PERS's loss in investment earnings. The system itself is based on the provision of retirement benefits based largely upon investment earnings, and then as well by the employee contributions and the employer contributions. In times when investment earnings are not adequate to meet the PERS target, public employer rates can be impacted by increases. And that has, in fact, been the case over the past number of years. It is more significantly the case right now, and although the PERS rate increase lags the actual situation of the investment earnings decline, we are expecting an additional amount and probably a significant increase in our rates as a result of the current economic situation. PERS has concluded, the grand jury has concluded that the current level of benefit is unsustainable for our communities. And as I said before, this is an issue which discussion of this issue has long predated the grand jury's analysis and their evaluation. And it has, in fact, been the subject of significant discussion among my colleagues and myself in the forum of the San Mateo County City Managers Association. Along with our colleagues in Santa Clara County, our group has taken a step to develop a position paper that articulates some issues relative to the PERS system, our participation in it, and the recommendation for a need to seriously evaluate the level of benefit that is currently provided and whether that is sustainable as a matter of policy into the long-term future. Our conclusion is similar to the grand jury's conclusion. we are well advised to begin seriously looking at and working with our labor representatives to initiate a readjustment of the benefit formula that many of our communities, including San Bruno, signed on to many years ago at a time when the employer rates were very low or actually zero. In our case, we are one of roughly, I would say, 60% or so of the communities in San Mateo County who use the enhanced formula both for safety as well as for non-safety employees. And the recommendation both of the city managers, the joint city managers associations, and the grand jury is that we work towards the establishment of what is called a two-tiered system, whereby new hires coming into public service who are not yet members of PERS would be put into a program that has a lower ultimate formula, both for safety and for non-safety. In conjunction with the other cities in our area, we believe that that is a viable recommendation and one that should be considered by this city as it is being considered by our colleagues up and down the peninsula. I need to say, and as we have said in the draft response to the grand jury, there is no immediate cost savings that would result from such a strategy, the creation of a two-tiered retirement system. However, it is possible that savings would be realized, or at least cost increases could be contained into the long-term future. And simply as a matter of public policy, we think that throwing out the baby with the bathwater is probably not a good idea, i.e., total reform of the PERS system. However, a ratcheting back, if you will, of the level of the benefit does make sense in the long term and is something that both your city managers as well as the grand jury conclude is a viable recommendation. Many others of the recommendations in the grand jury's report, I guess I will say right at the outset, at least in the detail and the way that the grand jury has analyzed them, I am not as strongly endorsing. In many of the recommendations, we have included in the draft response a statement that these are items that we should and will look at as part of the annual negotiations and budget setting process. And that is the case with the retiree medical benefit item. I think the grand jury was not completely aware that the city of San Bruno actually has a somewhat unique structure with respect to its retiree medical. And where the grand jury recommends that retiree medical benefits should be paid by the retiree, in fact, the city of San Bruno does not incur a specific cost related to the provision of the retiree medical benefit, as you are well aware. So we are not recommending that there be a major change to the way that this city actually handles that particular benefit. The response in this area also indicates, as do many of our responses in the draft document that you have in front of you tonight, a comment that in fact San Bruno has demonstrated a leadership position in many of the areas that the grand jury has addressed. And retiree, or rather the medical benefit as an item all by itself, is one where I would say that San Bruno has demonstrated a very strong leadership position and a very strong understanding of the reality of the impact that escalating medical costs have created for our organization as well as for others, both private and public sectors. Third area I want to comment on is the grand jury's several recommendations related to the establishment of city policy with respect to compensation. In this area, the grand jury has some fairly strong recommendations for an increase in public involvement up to and including the establishment of a citizen task force that would be tasked with developing an action plan for the city councils that would essentially establish the city's compensation philosophy and would guide negotiations and the overall area of employee compensation management. Fundamentally, this response, and I should note that this response tracks on a similar responses made by others of our colleagues in other cities. This response suggests that, in fact, the City Council, and this City Council in particular, is not only well prepared but very well understands its role and its obligation in this very, very important area of organization management and policy setting. There are many examples of how this City Council has managed the budget development process and with careful consideration of employee compensation related matters, how this council has demonstrated leadership and maintained a very strong policy position in support of containment of costs where appropriate related to compensation related issues. And beyond that, where this council has demonstrated its willingness to make tough decisions when those must be made with respect to the levels of public service that are affordable and the numbers of staff that must be employed or that are affordable to be employed in order to deliver those public services. So in general terms, this response suggests that the recommendation for the establishment of a citizen task force and the companion recommendation that a ballot measure potentially be established that would vest the public generally with this type of important policy setting. This response suggests that those recommendations are not as highly supported and are in fact not expected to be implemented here in San Bruno. I call those out for your attention because it's obviously important. This is your response, and it's obviously important that it reflects your particular understanding and opinion with respect to the areas that the grand jury has called out. With that, I'm going to ask Jim to quickly review some of the other areas of the grand jury's recommendations and the general comments that this response makes.
Again, just completing the overview of the recommendations by the grand jury that are covered by the draft response from the City Council in the agenda packet. There are really 4 other areas of consideration by the grand jury. The first is to renegotiate contracts with unions to modify current benefits provided to employees with a partial goal of, again, in this area, creating a 2-tier system for existing employees and for new employees. The grand jury's comments cover sick leave, vacation, and personal days provided as part of a compensation package. Again, your response as drafted points out that these and other benefits that exist have been agreed to following bargaining in good faith with the units, and that these are all part of a compensation package that is the subject of negotiations on an annual or periodic basis with the expiration of MOUs. The next round of negotiations, which would begin next year. And again, as the council sets the strategy and determines the level of compensation to be negotiated, these are subjects that the council may want to consider. The next area in the grand jury's report is to initiate what they're saying competitive hiring practices, which considers such things as doing more comparability of jobs and job salaries between the private and public sector. Similarly, a more market-oriented compensation practice related to the number of applicants and the demand for positions. They specifically call out considering the number of applicants when negotiating salaries, and then to outreach to colleges, community colleges, veterans groups, and high schools to maximize the number of individuals involved in the competitive process. Among other points in the response, just to point out as it relates to the comparability of jobs between the private and public sector, in our general fund, nearly 1/2 of the positions are police and fire positions, which obviously presents an obstacle for comparability in the private sector. So the comparability presents a challenge. It is something that we are always looking at, but there is that challenge of, in fact, finding comparable jobs and finding information, salary information in the private sector that is much more proprietary. Wanted to point out, and the report makes the case for the extensive outreach for recruitment purposes that the city's Human Resources Department, in conjunction with Human Resources Departments throughout the county, are making to maximize the pool of applicants for positions. The report also talks about the perceived need to reduce the need for the number of staff through either expanded technology, contracting out, or what they're calling partnerships. Again, your response discusses the extensive use of technology by the city and the positive impact that has had. In the area of contracting out, there is a great deal of contract services provided, all the way from animal control to crossing guards to other use of contracts, and that is been an undertaking of the city. And again, the creating of partnerships, probably the most noteworthy being the shared services agreement that the city has for fire chief and battalion chief services with the city of Millbrae. That has been both a functional good thing for both cities, and it has had budgetary impacts and has allowed for further reduction of our workforce. And again, your response reports to the grand jury just the reduction in the number of staff that has occurred in the general fund and elsewhere within the city organization since the early 2000s, and the very, very low number and the reduction of over 30 positions in the general fund over that period. The last area then involved public involvement, and I think the city manager had a couple of comments in this area, but they suggested holding public meetings prior to negotiations and approval of agreements. Again, your response points out that the City Council approves agreements in the public forum, that these are agenda items open to the public when the Council considers these. Further, the grand jury suggests making the MOUs and salary information public. That is done, again, as I mentioned, at the public meetings, but both all of the bargaining unit agreements and the salary schedule for quite a period of time has existed on the web page of the city and is accessible to all the public at any time. So that information has been made public to a large extent. So those are the remaining areas that the report covers. Did you want to talk about public? I think that really is our overview of your response, and we'd be glad to give any clarification or answer any questions you have.
Any questions of staff or comments from council? If not, direction to send the letter that was provided in the packet.
I agree. I was just going to say, it sounds like you made a very complicated issue very clear. The public often looks at cities and their salary, their budgets, and want to know how come everything is so high, how come the salaries are so high, what do we have to show for it? And the more times we repeat it, cities don't produce anything. They're a service organization, really. I think the better it is, and maybe everyone will learn a little bit.
Any other comments? If not, we should probably have just a motion to
Through the chair, motion
response.
to approve the response to the grand jury.
Second.
Motion and second. In discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.